All right, well, welcome. We're live at the Tennessee Theater, the official theater of the state of Tennessee. My name is Kris Tatum. I'm president and founder of Company Distilling, and I've got some great guests here with me, including my good friend and partner, Jeff Arnett, who's the master distiller of Company Distilling. I also have here with me Greg Eidam. He's the head distiller, Sugarlands Distilling Company, as well as a founder. And then we have the executive director of the Tennessee Theater, Becky Hancock. So welcome, everybody.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate everybody's time. This is our inaugural episode of Distilling Greatness for Company Distilling. Our focus is just to talk and chat and have a good time. And today we're going to talk a lot about the history of the Tennessee Theater and the history of Tennessee whiskey. So that's where we're planning to go. And kind of, if we could kick off, tell everybody, take a couple seconds to tell a little bit about each other if you would. And Jeff, if you don't mind starting us off.
Sure. My name is Jeff Arnett. I was one of the founders of Company Distilling when we were founded a couple of years ago. Prior to that, I spent nearly 20 years with Jack Daniels. I served as their master distiller for 12 of those years. So that's kind of how I ended up in the industry. But I'm a native Tennessean, super proud to be from the state of Tennessee because I've lived in other states. And I think, when I lived in Texas, I found out just how proud people were about Texas if they were from Texas. And I said, I wasn't proud of Texas. It made me more proud of Tennessee and actually made me want to come back home someday. So, I'd worked with Procter & Gamble prior to Jack Daniels. But once I got back to Tennessee, I was saying, I'm putting down roots and I'm going to stay here. So good to be here.
Well, it's awesome to have you. It's a great friend of mine and my partner. We've had a crazy couple of years starting this thing off, and I'm sure we'll have several crazy more. So, Greg, tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Greg Eidam, the head distiller with Sugarlands Distilling Company, and one of the founders there. Really, I think you guys brought me in here to give you a little credibility, and I don't know what Jeff brings to the table, but really, it's keep your friends close, your enemies closer, right? So you brought me in here so I can make fun of myself, probably, and.
We control editing rights, so yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he just maybe, I'm going to look bad, and that's good. That's all right. Because one thing I can count on is Kris to have a little fun with us.
We will definitely have some fun.
You are going to, yes, you will make this interesting.
Well, I appreciate that. We do have a professional in the group.
Professional what?
I just said professional. Miss Becky Hancock. She's the executive director of Tennessee Theater. So please tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah. Great to be here with you guys today, and welcome to my home, my home away from home, my work home, the Tennessee Theater, beautiful theater. We're recording up here in the balcony, or the mezzanine foyer, as it's known. I am also a Tennessee native, Knoxville native, and have been here most of my life. I lived away for 6 years just after college, but I've been back in Knoxville for over 20 years. And most of those years I've worked here at the Tennessee Theater. So I was a general manager for quite a few years during the renovation of this beautiful building, which we'll talk about a little bit. And then for the last 9 years, I've been the executive director. So happy to be where I am and get to come to work every day at this beautiful place.
Well, that's great. We're happy. We are very excited. We've recently announced a partnership with the Tennessee Theater that we're going to try to do some different things. I mean, everybody always comes into a new partnership talking about, we're going to do it different, all this jazz. But I really believe after the hours of time that we spent with your team, Nikki and Travis, that we were going to be able to get some different things. And one of it is definitely incorporating our industry and then the friends we have in the industry like Greg and others into this podcast, as well as what we're doing as far as Tennessee Theater. So we're looking forward to it. So let's get this thing going, if that's okay with everybody else. And we're going to rapid fire you a little bit, Becky.
Okay.
Give us a little bit, if you would, a little bit of history of the Tennessee Theater.
Well, I will tell you up front that it's impossible to tell the whole story.
I understand.
Our tours are usually about 2 hours long, and I still don't get it all told, but I know we're under time constraints today. But yeah, the Tennessee Theater, 94 years old, opened October 1st, 1928, as a motion picture palace. And if you've been here at the Tennessee Theater, you know why they call it a movie palace, designed to be opulent in every corner, top to bottom, to make the average person coming in off the street feel like royalty. That was what these places were built for. And I think it still accomplishes that today. So it is now more of a live music venue than it is a movie theater, although we do still show films, show movies occasionally. But we're really the home for Broadway here in Knoxville. We do a lot of great touring concerts and comedy. We are the host of many fine performing arts organizations here in Knoxville, the Knoxville Symphony, the Knoxville Opera, the Knoxville Jazz Orchestra. And then we do a lot of free and family events too. So we try to program the building for everybody so that everyone finds something that they can enjoy and make memories here.
I think that's great. We, looking and doing a little bit of research in the past, and this is located in the heart of downtown Knoxville. It's great that I love it. I grew up East Tennessee. I love the fact that the State Theater is in downtown Knoxville. I grew up right across the bridge over there. So the fact that it has been embraced by everyone across the state is huge. Bringing people together. I thought it was interesting. We visited other theaters, et cetera, just in travels. And Jeff and I were actually talking about how it was, like you talked about the movie Palace, and it was by like the movie house, like Paramount or whatever.
Paramount or
whatever. And I thought that was really cool.
So those big Hollywood studios in the 1920s, Paramount, Fox, Lowe's, RKO, they would go around and build these theaters across the country in communities big and small. You wouldn't think, wow, Knoxville, Tennessee in 1928 got a big old theater like this. Well, tiny little towns in Iowa and Kansas and Nebraska and South Carolina and all those places got those kinds of theaters, this kind of theater. But it was to promote their product, the films that were being churned out in the 1920s. So, but Knoxville is lucky to still have this theater. And, it's still thriving 94 years later.
That's awesome. When you said that about it was to, promote their products and it was a house of it, it kind of immediately made me think of when we got to be around as far as distilleries in the 2010 law time, legislative process that gave us an opportunity for our craft, whether it was, Jack Daniels, where Jeff was at for almost 20 years, or when, Greg and I have done distilleries, that we got to, that's what we did. We built our distillery to have a place to promote a product, but it ended up being a place to gather around and spend time with each other. So it's kind of neat. There's a great correlation there.
Yeah, I look at the timing of the building and the opening of the Tennessee Theater, and it falls kind of in the middle of Tennessee's Prohibition period. So it was obvious that people were looking for things to do because some of the things that maybe they had historically done were no longer available to them. So this was a thing that would bring people out in a positive way, allow them to gather, which a lot of things you would see maybe in restaurants or bars or things today. But still just as relevant, I think, even after Prohibition. This is a beautiful place on National Register of Historic Places, which so is Jack Daniels.
Okay.
So these things are kind of intricately tied to the state of the state of Tennessee's history, I believe, and kind of are both celebrating art to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think if you would touch on kind of the commonalities, we talked a little commonalities on our side just now, so to speak, on the industry side. But what did the art and science connection, the commonalities, what did that do for the community, do you think, at the time? I mean, I know you said it's where they came to see a picture or a show, but was it more than that, do you think, or was that just...
Well, so, in the late 1920s, movies were it, right? This is before television. Radio had been around for a long time, but movies were the new thing. And so to go out to see a movie or a motion picture was a big deal, and people got dressed up for it. My dad, who moved to Knoxville when he was 11 in 1940, but he would tell me stories about coming to the Tennessee Theater, and he would say, if you were serious about a girl, you took her to the Tennessee. Because there were a lot of other movie theaters on Gay Street, but none as big and as beautiful as this one. Ironically, there were actually no beverages served here at the Tennessee Theater in 1928. No sodas, no water, no candy, no concessions at all. So Prohibition wasn't even a factor for this building. They didn't introduce concessions until a few years later when they realized that they could make more money if they sold their own product rather than allowing people to bring in stuff from the candy store across the street. So, but the theater was also built with a stage. So while movies were the new art form and the hot thing, there was always a stage show. From day one, there was live entertainment on the stage as well. So it was sort of a bridge between the vaudeville era and the movie era. So you had, small performers like, jugglers or comedians or some other sort of entertainment that sort of warmed the crowd up for the film that would follow. But yeah, I mean, memories were made here by many, many members of the community. And we see it now where grandparents and even great grandparents are bringing their families back to this theater to make memories here.
I think it's a great point to be made, or point to talk about, is definitely the memories made. I mean, even me as a kid coming here has been phenomenal. Memories of just walking in whenever we got to meet with you. It was amazing. So, the Tennessee Theater Foundation, it's a not-for-profit organization, correct? And it says, I think I've come on notes here, tasked with maintaining and preserving the historic theater and ensuring diverse arts and cultural entertainment. I think that's awesome. I mean, just simply put, it's awesome. But I think that what we've talked about as a team is that that's what we want to do as well. Is there's a lot of science and stuff, and we're going to touch on that on a later episode. But there's so much science about it. There's so much social aspect about it, and then there's still that whole capitalism kind of aspect of it. That hey, let's sell our stuff. So I think that's amazing, and this facility is beautiful. If you haven't been here, had a renovation. When was the year of the renovation?
Yeah, so the foundation was formed in 1996. The building was privately owned until that time, and around that time, the owner wanted to be sure that it was preserved permanently, and so he helped set up. His name was James Dick. His wife Marilyn. He and Marilyn were very instrumental in the preservation and the fact that we have a Tennessee Theater today in 2023. So a nonprofit was formed, and that board of directors were tasked with, okay, what do we need to do to preserve this building? And talk about the merger of art and science. It certainly was. They put together a huge team of architects and designers and engineers and planners, theatrical consultants, to make sure that this building, number one, all of the beauty and the grandeur that we appreciate was preserved and restored. But then a lot of changes backstage, especially to the stage, to the stage house, to the dressing rooms, to the support spaces, so that the theater could function in the 21st century as a performing venue and not just a movie theater. So that was a huge project. We were closed for 19 months from June of 2003 until January 2005. It was a $30 million project. So
wow,
no jewel was left unturned, basically. Every square inch of the walls, the ceilings, the floors were thought of in that renovation. So, and now, 18 years later, we're going strong.
It's beautiful. Just advanced technology, staging, lighting, the stuff that you've done to still keep the old feel around here is amazing. It really is.
I think about the number you just shared, that $30 million was spent, and at today's pricing, that would be a tremendous deal. because when you walk through this place, it is spectacular.
When they built the building,
I was overwhelmed the first time I came in.
1928, it only cost $1 million, which in today's dollars is around 15 to 18 million. You could not build this building for $18 million for sure. And even a $30 million renovation was, we have it insured for more than double that in case a meteor ever hits it. But yeah, it's, and I also want to emphasize, talking about community and memories, the community, the local community raised the money to preserve and save this theater. So we did get some public funding, a lot of support from public officials, city, county, state, and some federal money as well. But 3,500 individuals gave gifts between $5 and $5 million and all the numbers in between to come together to say, yes, we want to preserve this theater and we want to make it the best it can possibly be. So the community came together back, in the early 2000s to make that happen.
Yep. Mission accomplished.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can tell you, I'm in awe walking around this place. And to me, it's right up there with some, major cathedrals that I've been in the past. So this is pretty special.
Yeah. And we all recognize the importance of having a place like this. Jeff describes it, and I know Jeff's described it a lot, especially when it comes to whiskey and bourbon, that whiskey and bourbon has a sense of place. And both our locations as well as your locations, they're big about that as far as sense of place, something to do, trying to capture that person, not just capture them to come spend a buck, but to come spend some time. And I think that that's a good synergy there as well. Greg, you would say the same even?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about capturing your audience and their attention and their senses. And it's just, it heightens everything, So when they come into something as special as this, you can't help but like you're walking into another world, another space. And it just takes you to a different level.
Yeah. And it comes down to, Jeff, again, Jeff said this and I've said it and everybody else, Tennessee's known for Elvis, Dolly, and whiskey. And that's pretty freaking good. That's good company. You know what I'm saying? So, but so appreciate that. I mean, good. This is amazing. If we, I'd like to kind of transition over a little bit, especially with that whole Elvis Dolly and Jack Daniels. But talk a little bit about the history of Tennessee whiskey. Across the board. Jeff, as he said, former master distiller Jack Daniels, my friend and partner at Company, and our head distiller over here at Sugarlands. We're gonna kind of jump into that and talk a little bit about the history. Not so much the science. We're gonna get to that to a later episode. We'll get some people that are prettier and smarter than these guys and in here, but we'll have a good time and talk a little bit about it. So if you could give us a little history on the Tennessee history, Jeff.
Sure. So yeah, if you go back prior to the Tennessee Theater being built, whiskey has long been a part of the fabric of the state of Tennessee. And largely that has to do with the fact that it was a very practical thing to know how to do if you were a farmer. So, the state founded in 1796, the first economy here, and still one of the top two economies in the state of Tennessee is agriculture. So you're growing grain, and inevitably you kind of get to the end of the season, you've got a new crop coming in, you have leftover grain. You don't want to destroy that. If anything, you need to find a way to condense its value down, into a smaller footprint of something that has higher value. So it was more of a practical thing that farmers learned how to ferment grain and distill it, and it had bartering value. So this was something that you could go out into the trading space with too. So it's like, you exchange it for goods and services and stuff like that. So, the early forms of distilling in the state of Tennessee were really just more of a practical matter of being in an agricultural economy. Things began to change. If you look, through the 1800s, especially by the late 1800s, 1860 was when the federal government largely started to get involved. They wanted to go around and they wanted to regulate the industry. They wanted to register distilleries. They wanted to start to tax, as the federal government will do. They were looking for ways to kind of get their hands around what was going on. So, Jack Daniels gets the distinction of being one of the first registered distilleries. It claims to be the first, but, some of that is kind of hard to prove. But clearly one of the first, federally recognized distilleries was Jack Daniels. So that happened in the 1860s, but still at that point, whiskey did not look like what it looks like today, where you think about brands in the marketplace and bottles and things of that nature. It was still very much a commodity. So you went and bought barrels of whiskey, and you typically weren't buying them if you were a consumer. You were letting saloons or different establishments, bring in barrels, and then they would serve you by the glass. Not a lot of regulation going on there. You don't know what the proof was, because when the barrel would start to run low, they start adding water back into it. So people began to realize that, a shot here wasn't like a shot there. So there was some need to start putting it in bottles with labels with, some measurements of what you're getting. So you started to see your first bottle bourbon. That was Old Forester in 1870 that came out of Kentucky. But that kind of started trending with the rest of the industry too. So if you look at some of the early newspaper articles that came around Nashville from the late 1800s, they wouldn't necessarily mention brands like George Dickel or Jack Daniels or any of the Kentucky bourbon brands. What they would speak of would be styles more than anything. They would say this is a sour mash whiskey, or this is a bourbon, or this is a Lincoln County whiskey, things of that nature. So
how significant was that Lincoln County, Jeff? Was it a financial significance, or
Yeah, so back when whiskey was being sold as a commodity, the federal government had strong pressures to basically regulate pricing too.
Okay.
So if something was being sold as a sour mash whiskey, it had a certain value per gallon, and you were kind of restricted to not sell it above or beyond that point. So that was they were not just regulating how much you were making, but what you were selling it at too.
Oh wow!
So very highly regulated. One of the reasons why, a lot of people argue now, is Tennessee whiskey a bourbon or not? Because of charcoal mellowing. Lim Motlow actually was fighting with the federal government because he was trying to break out of the commodity pricing that was attached to bourbon. Because he said the Lincoln County process was more expensive to make. Therefore, if bourbons were selling for $2 a gallon, he wanted $2.10 a gallon to help pay for that. So that's one of the reasons why he was fighting to kind of create a new class that had a higher price point on it.
Okay.
So, brilliant marketer and obviously a smart businessman.
Yeah.
But, so that kind of carries through to, at least in the state of Tennessee, national prohibition happened, and it was voted for in 1919. It was enacted January of 1920. But in Tennessee, the temperance movement had kind of started before that.
Okay.
About a decade before, that there were people that were, kind of arguing the rightness or wrongness of consuming alcohol, a lot of pressure. I often describe if there is a Bible Belt, Tennessee's kind of the buckle of it, right? We're kind of right in the middle of what you would describe as the Bible Belt. So people were already beginning to argue over it, but two people who had been previously very close friends got greatly divided over the temperance movement. It resulted in an argument in downtown Nashville. One shot the other and killed him. And that sort of triggered Tennessee to go dry 10 years before the rest of the country.
Wow.
So it started in 1919 for most of the U.S., but 1909 for Tennessee. So, and it stayed 5 years longer. Even after national prohibition was lifted, the state waited another 5 years to lift it. Yeah.
Wasn't it even at that point, it was also even kind of still a restricted prohibition, because I think there was 3 distilleries at some point. I mean, I believe that's right.
It was. So it was actually, I guess, Lem Motlow, who was Jack's nephew, who was willed the distillery. After national prohibition was lifted, he kind of made it his mission to overturn the state's prohibition. So he actually ran for office, went to Nashville, served as a state representative, lobbying the other lawmakers to get the law overturned, which it took him, it was actually 1937. Was the year that it got overturned. But then once it got overturned in 1937, he kind of stepped out of office. He came back to Lynchburg. He started working on the distillery, got it back open in 1938. Wow. So there was a big dry period, from 1909 to 1938 in the state of Tennessee. Yeah.
And that's when it kind of came back to the 3. And then we'll fast forward a little. We could talk a little bit about the creation of Dickel and all that, but we'll save that for later probably. But
when the state decided to overturn prohibition, at that point it was still very restrictive.
It was, right.
So there were 95 counties in the state of Tennessee. Only Bedford, Coffee, and Lincoln were the 3, and they're all attached to one another. In southern Middle Tennessee. So those 3 counties were the ones that were given the right to do it. Only Moore County picked up the right, and that was with Jack Daniels at the time.
That's amazing.
To open. Yeah. So there was only one distillery from 1938 to actually 1958.
So 20 years. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we had a couple come along after that. Dickel's created in 56, 58, something like that. And then
those stories are actually attached to one another. A lot of people don't know, but there was a distiller out of New York called Shinley, and they actually had long wanted to buy Jack Daniels. But there was some bad blood between the Motlows and Shinley distillers, because while Tennessee was in a prohibition period, Shinley had tried to kind of rip off the Jack Daniels trademark while they were kind of shuttered there. So it kind of set off this dislike of one another, mistrust. So when the Motlows decided to sell Jack Daniel Distillery, he had 4 brothers who had no male heirs. All they had were women. It was still very much a man's industry then.
Right.
So they felt like it was appropriate at that point to sell it because they didn't have anybody to pass it to. But it was at that point that Brown-Forman, they had a relationship with Brown-Forman out of Louisville, Kentucky. They accepted I think it was about $2 million less for Brown-Forman just to not let Shinley get their hands on the distillery because they disliked them that bad. But after they lost the bid to buy Jack Daniels, they still wanted in the Tennessee whiskey market. So they created the Georgia Dickel brand. They started in 1956. It took them from 56 to 58 to build the Cascade Hollow distillery that you would tour today.
Oh, wow. That's craziness. So if we can, we'll kind of fast forward a little. 2009 came along, I believe. Tennessee changes the law to allow distilling in 44 counties. As we noted earlier, it was 3. That was 3 prior to that. And during that time, I think one of the biggest people that jumped in was Greg and his team there at Sugarlands. And so if you could take us a little bit through how you were there from the beginning with Sugarlands. Obviously not the first in the industry, but the first probably in the new era of the industry. Is that a good way to put it? Take us a little bit through that, if you don't mind, what that was like.
Yeah, certainly. Well, we were right there in downtown Gatlinburg, right? And Gatlinburg is right there at the base of the Appalachian Mountains. And Appalachia, the Scots-Irish that settled that region really brought about moonshine, during Prohibition. And that craft of moonshine was dying out. And we felt like there was a story to tell, bring it back, kind of pay homage to that tradition and those old timers that had been, working that for a long time. And so, when we opened up, it was about telling that story, bringing on, paying homage to it. And after, about a year of really kind of bringing about, honing in our processes, our mashing and our distilling, and feeling like, we had everything going in the right direction and stuff. It was time to start making whiskey. And here we are in Tennessee. So, what's more special than Tennessee whiskey and the long tradition? So we started making whiskey. And with that, we ended up, working with, we actually brought somebody in. So I'm going to touch base here with, or bring in Trent Curley. So Trent was a master's student at the University of Tennessee. And so he came up with this, research project. He was working under John Manafo over there at the Food Science Department. And he wanted to dive into the Lincoln County process and figure out, what made the difference in Tennessee whiskey. What is that process all about? What's the science behind it? And so with that, they decided to, come up with this process and the chemistry to single out the compounds that are affected through that process. And I know we're not going to get into the science of that, so I'm not going to dive into it and stuff now. But anyway, we were very fortunate to be able to bring Trent onto our team to help us work on developing Tennessee whiskey. So with that, we're still learning. We don't have the 100 years or whatever of Jack Daniel's experience and the Brown-Forman experience. But, we wanted to, accelerate that process and figure out, how do we tweak the process? How do we make it work for us? What are the important elements of it? So I don't know if we want to talk anymore about, Lincoln County process, which is really what makes Tennessee whiskey different than everything else, right? You've already kind of led into that, separate from bourbon, right?
Yeah, but, and I've talked to people about it. It's like, do you think that charcoal mellowing makes a better product? That's one of the things that people argue. And I'm like, well, we can argue whether it makes it better or not. It makes it different. Mm-hmm. And it creates a distinctly different product. It changes the nose. It changes the mouthfeel. There's exchanges. There's things that are extracted. There's things that are removed from the distillate as it passes through. And you don't have to do what Jack Daniel's does to get what you want to get out of it. But to me, I think one of the things that has always made me enjoy this industry so much is, I was an engineer from college. So I was the kid that took, all my Christmas presents apart, wanted to know how they worked. If I was lucky, I could put them back together and they still worked by December the 26th. Sometimes they didn't. But I was, kind of fascinated by how things worked. And I feel like this industry gives you, if you're a science geek, it gives you plenty of that. There's plenty of science to study and sink your teeth into, whether it be fermentation sciences or distillation sciences. And in that regard, we're all kind of bound by those same laws of science. But it's the art that separates us. That's why not every distillery is going to taste the same. It's how you choose to run your fermentation process. It's whether or not you mellow or not. It's whether you use 10 feet of charcoal or a foot. It's how quickly you change it out. So to me, it gives Tennessee sort of an art spin on this industry that maybe you don't see being used in Kentucky or any other state for that matter. It's clearly a unique heritage step process that we do. And I think it's one that I think collectively we're glad that we protected that as part of the identity of Tennessee whiskey, because there were some arguments over whether or not a couple of brands that had kind of carried the water for the state in regards of Tennessee whiskey should dictate to everyone else that they had to do it. But I think most of us have said, being in Tennessee, we'd be foolish not to find some way to incorporate that in the process. It's just one more thing to talk about. It's one more unique product you can make. Yeah,
I'm really proud of the fact that the Tennessee Distillers Guild stepped up and was instrumental in preserving that legislation. And that's something that's special. Nobody else anywhere in the world can recreate. And so we've got a lot we can do with that process. And so it's not just Jack Daniel's and George Dickel. So now you've got all these new distillers from across the state, and each one of them can put their own, thumbprint on Tennessee whiskey.
Yeah, I think what we're sitting here having this conversation, Becky, just so you know, first, number one, these are two of the biggest nerds you'll ever meet. So I just want to make sure you're clear on that. You're kind of new to the group.
I'm learning.
But they are big nerds. But number two on is that I hope you kind of see what I'm talking about where it comes to the art and the craft, the history, the importance of people, the importance of place. That's why I know that we've looked to have this synergy with the Tennessee Theater and how important that is. And also why we've looked to have the synergy with other distilleries in the state. The three of us were on the founding board for the guild. And we always said we're going to, argue and fight like brothers and sisters in this, or, in this room, we're brothers and sisters, and let the marketing teams fight it out outside the room. And we stayed really true to that. And so, we talked about, we're going to have another episode coming up about science. We're going to have another episode coming up talking about the history or the legal parts of Tennessee whiskey and the distilling industry. But then also we're going to touch big on the actual guild and the launch of the trail. I mean, there's a ton of things coming down the pike that are going to be great to add to and continue to add to the history and the lore, if you will, of our industry, So I think it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, if you go back in time, of course, Jack Daniel's in 38, George Dickel coming online in 58, no more distilleries until Pritchard opens in 1999.
Yeah.
And then when the laws changed in 2009, now this explosion with 50 different distillers. And, we ended up meeting through the Tennessee Distillers Guild, where we recognize that we're stronger together and we have a lot more in common as far as our objectives and things that we need. And we were all dealing with laws that were written in the late 1930s that weren't very progressive. They kind of restricted your ability to market or succeed. But, everybody had some skin in the game. And it's like, I've kind of chosen Tennessee to make my investment. And I need to kind of clear a path where I don't want to be reckless or irresponsible or anything, but I want to build a brand and have some chance of success. So that's kind of how we all ended up working together. But I think people would be surprised at how, as big as the industry might look, 50 plus distilleries across the state now, we all pretty much know one another and we're all very friendly with one another. We try to help one another out. You don't necessarily share recipes and secrets and stuff like that because you do want to protect your brand. But when you can offer a hand, a hand up to someone, you try to do that because we feel like rising tide raises all ships. We've used that several times. And for the Tennessee Distillers Guild, it's been largely about just trying to achieve parity with other forms of beverage alcohol. We weren't asking really for anything beyond what beer and wine producers were already getting, but we're like, we shouldn't be treated differently as long as we're being responsible, not, over-serving or serving people underage and things of that nature. But clearly it's been a great thing, I think, creating the Tennessee Distillers Guild, the friendships that have been formed through that, companies that have spun off from those friendships like ours are kind of reshaping.
I think, see where you went with that.
Yeah.
You like that? Nice.
Yeah, like
way to work that in.
But the other thing I was thinking too is, and I've talked with Kris and all of our partners quite a bit about this. If you're a vodka or a gin, and for that matter, a lot of those products can be sold on celebrity or on social status and stuff like that. They're kind of image-focused brands, but whiskeys are kind of a different thing. They are a product of place. People want to know if it's from Tennessee, or they want to know if it's from Kentucky, if it's from Oregon, if it's from Japan or Canada, or from Scotland. There's certain expectations that come with whiskeys based on where they're made. So it's very much, Tennessee matters. Yeah. Tennessee whiskey, you can't kind of take it out and it still be the same. It's sold on stories. Whiskey, more than any other type of product, you don't have to necessarily have a story to be successful in the vodka space. But people kind of want to know. They'll drink your story in while they drink your product. Yeah. When it comes to whiskey, so your story, you have to become a storyteller. And I think about the theater, and it's kind of this is a storytelling place, right? Whether it was through film or
and going
music.
back to how the Distillers Guild and how you all you compete with each other, but you also rely on each other. And I do the same thing in our business. I have colleagues all over the country who run old theaters, and I can call them up and ask for advice. We get together once a year. We have a big conference. We talk about our industry. We talk about challenges. We talk about what's going well. So we make each other better. We probably don't directly compete against each other as much as you all do in your business, but nonetheless, you use that to make each of you better. And it just, then the consumer benefits from that. And memories, storytelling. We did a podcast a couple of years ago for our 90th anniversary, and it was so much fun to gather those stories. And the stories are endless, and we're looking forward to the stories that this theater is going to create well into its second century. So yeah, and we're really excited about the partnership with Company.
Well, we appreciate that. Speaking of stories, let's do a little bit here. If we can, tell us what's your biggest thing coming up here the rest of 23. We're right here early in 2023. So tell us here at Tennessee Theater, one of the things that you're most excited about over in the next, the rest of this year.
Yeah, well, Broadway is always a really, really big driver here for the Tennessee Theater. We started Broadway in 2008, and so 2023, we are well into a great Broadway season. We've got Hamilton this season, which is a huge highlight for this theater. Then we've got a couple of more shows later in this year, and then we'll announce our 23-24 season in April, sometime in April. So it's a great way to experience the theater if you've never been here. But got a lot of great rock and roll and comedy and
great,
you name it.
That's awesome. So Greg, we got the rest of the year sitting at us. I'm sure you guys had a phenomenal Christmas and etc. What do you guys got coming down the pike the rest of this year at Sugarlands?
I'll say peppermint, candy cane, moonshine products or something.
We might have some candy canes out there. That's true.
Was that fun? Yeah.
A lot of fun. Yeah. And really pretty special. We have a collaboration with Kellogg's with Eggo. That's awesome. Eggo Nog this year for Christmas.
So yeah, that was good. Did that go over pretty well?
Oh, very well received. Yeah. Everyone's really excited about it. And the only problem is we didn't make nearly enough of it.
Yeah.
So next year we might have to write that. So we'll be good. So, but we've just really, our new distillery is up and operational.
Okay, great.
Really just kind of getting that thing moving forward, figuring out what we're doing, what's up, what's down, and look to make a lot more whiskey this next year.
Good. That's awesome.
And go ahead and put out the bragging point. You have the largest pot still in the U.S. or North America. What is the distinction you have?
We do. The largest whiskey pot still in the country at 4,500 gallons.
That's amazing. Yes. Is that like having a really fast sports car too? The correlation there?
It is.
Oh, I just want to make sure I understood that.
Except we're not making up for anything.
Yeah, well, I feel like you are, but that's okay.
Well, maybe, yeah.
So size matters is what you're saying.
Size does matter.
With that being said, before we go too bad,
don't be jealous.
So I've lived my life that way. It's okay. So Jeff, we had a great launch of our rye. We also put out a cask strength in 2022. Had some continued success opening some new markets. What are we looking at? I'm going to ask you, hey, tell me, what are we doing for the rest of this year, man?
Yeah. So, we've tried to start opening up our portfolio because even though we're making flavored spirits, we have a gin brand and gin's fantastic. I love it. It's called Ghost Trail. Of course, my passion has always been brown spirit. So I want to continue to make bourbons, whiskeys. We're going to put out our first Tennessee whiskey product. We're going to continue to explore wood finishes beyond what I've seen other brands do, because I feel like there's a lot of power in that. I love the sort of the art side of being able to take woods that you couldn't traditionally make into a barrel, but still be able to influence and bend the character of the spirit using that. So we'll continue our exploration of fruit trees and hardwoods and stuff of that nature. We've got a brewery that's going to be coming online in Townsend. So excited to be able to offer something that's made fresh on the peaceful side for people who want to come over. We've got the mountain biking park that's kind of still gearing up. So people like to ride bikes over there. World class, national, one of the best companies that designs mountain biking parks. They collaborated together to lay out a 14-mile course. So people like to ride mountain bikes and grab a cold beer at the end of it. We're going to be able to do both.
Yeah, come up and check out V Hollow. So kind of wrap this up. The next episodes are coming up. We're going to talk about some science on the distillation process next time. We've got legal. We got more history on the Tennessee Whiskey Trail. Love to have Tennessee Theater, somebody from there else if you'd like, or Becky, please come back and join us and keep the intelligence level high for this podcast. That's what we need most.
Well, it's been a great pleasure to spend some time with you guys today.
But we appreciate it. So everybody, make sure you check out Tennessee Theater, downtown Knoxville, Sugarlands in Gallenberg, and then come by and see us at Company in Townsend and or Thompson Station. So I appreciate everybody joining us this evening, and we hope everybody has a great year. Thanks.
Appreciate you leading us, Kris. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yep.